Okay? So far I've been concentrating exclusively on the chordal side of funk guitar. So I'd like to change horses a little bit right now and get into some single note material. Touch is an absolutely essential element of funk. How hard you pick, whether you play staccato, legato, all these different touches play a huge role in the sound. Now I'm going to play a simple 2-bar E pentatonic lick that's right off the 5th position of the E blues scale. And I'm going to play it 2 different ways. Now you check out the difference between the 2 versions. 3, 4. Now here's the second version. Now obviously the second version is much funkier, there's no competition. And the reason is I'm nailing the strings hard. And particularly on a Strat, when you do that, you get this kind of clucky thing happening, which you won't get if you just pick the strings like it's a jazz guitar with a big fat jazz box like an L5 or something, and you're going, just doesn't make it on this kind of groove. So let's try it with the track, and let's see how it sounds up to tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's another 2-bar low register single note pattern that needs the same kind of rough treatment to be really happening. It's right off the same 5th position E pentatonic scale as the last example. 3, 4. This is pretty typical of a standard E-funk groove that can be played over an E9th chord or an E7th chord. And the most interesting thing about it is the way that the bass weaves in and out of the guitar part. It goes back to that hit it where they ain't concept I spoke about earlier in the video, where when the guitar stops, there's a bass note, and when the bass plays, the guitar is being quiet, and then the guitar starts and the bass isn't playing, and they're constantly weaving in and out of each other's rhythmic holes. And that's what makes this particular track so funky. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hopefully you saw what I meant about the bass and the guitar weaving in and out of each other and how they play in each other's holes. The other thing to notice is the tone of the guitar in this. I was really hammering these notes, and the way I was doing it was I was using down picks on almost everything. And it's even more than just down picks. So when I play the low A, I use the A string on the 5th fret and I let the open A string stop my pick. I play the B at the 7th fret and I let the A string stop my pick again. I hit the D at the 5th fret of the A string and let the open D string stop my pick. And finally I hit the G over here at the 5th fret and I let the G string stop my pick. And that's the key to getting this. And it really makes the song cook, makes the guitar part have that clucky effect, which is what you want in funk. On the last 2 examples, I was slamming the strings pretty hard. Now I'm going to give you a different look. Sometimes the key to being funky is to be unfunky. I'm going to play you a 4-bar phrase that features very even single notes with everything happening squarely on the downbeats. There's no percussive muting or choking, and there's no syncopations off the 16th notes, and yet this is an absolutely funky, nasty guitar part. Check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. James Brown would say, ain't it funky now? Well, how come? It's because the guitar is working to provide a nice, uncomplicated background for all the syncopations you heard in the bass and the drums, and it allows them to come center stage. Also, the wah-wah pedal instantly identifies the sound and places this lick in the funk domain. Now, when you play the pedal, you can tap rhythmically with the beat like this. Or you can sweep across the frequencies slowly. Now the next example is an interesting case because it shows how funk sometimes pulls from unexpected sources. Funk, obviously, because of the proliferation of syncopations off the 16th, gets a lot of its ideas from Latin and jazz, and of course blues because of all the blues scales. But occasionally guys even dip a little further back into the 30s. I'm sure you recognize this old Delta blues lick. Well, that lick happened to filter down into a few important and very influential funk guitar styles. So I'd like to play you a slow one in E minor, and you'll see this same idea, which is coming right off an E minor chord. And I'll show you a lick that is very reminiscent of what was happening on the Delta in the 30s and 40s, and it wound up in the 70s in the middle of a few very important funk jams. The first bar of this two-bar lick features an updated version of this Delta lick with an added 6th degree, which is this C sharp here. So, see, this is just part of an E minor triad. You want to bend this G up a little bit just to pull it slightly out of tune, about a quarter tone. Then you hit this 6th degree, mute, and then you got, in the second bar, a little Chuck Berry kind of thing. When you put it all together, and this is kind of a E Dorian vamp because of the C sharp, which is the characteristic note of Dorian. So it's kind of modal. Let's see how it sounds with the rhythm section. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, you know I couldn't show my face back in Philadelphia unless I put a little example of Philly-style funk in this. I'm going to show you a two-bar phrase that is over two changes, B-flat for one bar and G minor for one bar. And it basically relies on intervals, not single notes or chords as we've done on most of the examples up till now. And the two basic intervals are thirds and fourths. And they both come directly off the chord positions. Here's the B-flat chord position. And we're going to go. So here's your fourth. So as you can see, it's right off that B-flat chord. the second chord, G minor. So the second bar features thirds. So let's play it slow and see how that sounds. 3, 4. So let's see how it sounds with the rhythm section. 1, 2, 3, 4. One of John Lee Hooker's fellow bluesmen once said to him, "John Lee, when you play so down and dirty, you sound like you was covered with mud." Well, I'm going to play you a groove that sounds like you're covered with mud also, but from a different place than the Mississippi Delta. Sounds like mud from a Louisiana swamp. This is a groove in the style of the Meters. 1, 2, 3, 4. I chose this example because I wanted to give you something that's kind of tough to lock to. The reason it's so hard is because of this deathly slow tempo. When you have a slow groove like this, it's always harder to play because the time between the beats widens and it's easier to fall off the pace. Now the first 4 bars of this in that kind of intro with just the drums and the guitar are basically just C to F. And with each chord getting 2 beats, you have all these thirds, 4 single notes, and pull-offs working off them. And they're all right in the 5th position, right off the C scale. That's the C chord you're just hammering on. Now you're into the F chord. Second bar. Now you're going to hammer into an F chord. Back to the C chord, 3rd bar. C, F, C. Now you're on the F. Now let's get into the second part of this where the bass comes in. The entire vamp is over a C9 chord, so this whole groove works over a C9. And it's basically a 2-bar phrase where the first bar is kind of dark. You have this, the return of our friend, the Jimmy Nolan 9th chord, followed by, it's just 2/4 intervals, followed by, which is a pretty unorthodox little lick. It's a 4th that you hammer into the top or the bottom 2 notes of the C chord, and then you brighten up the lick on the second bar with a little major scale pull-off figure. So when you put it all together, you got. There was an explosion of black films in the film industry during the 70s. There were masterpieces of the genre like Superfly and Shaft. And then you had some other less stellar offerings like Hell Up in Harlem and my all-time personal favorite, Blackula. But for us guitar players, they were all cool because they opened up a new kind of funk guitar style centered around the wah-wah pedal. Here's a Curtis Mayfield style lick reminiscent of the stuff that he played on his Superfly soundtrack. Harmonically, it's extremely simple. Just some bluesy thirds over a C-sharp minor harmony. And the wah-wah is what makes it come to life and gives it that haunting atmosphere. 1, 2, 3, 4. The important thing to realize when you have a wah-wah part like this is that you don't attack the notes, you let the wah-wah do the walking. So in other words, you hit this chord and you use the wah-wah to go to create the other three notes. So you go, and you play the second part. So the wah-wah creates the notes. You don't re-attack the strings. Everything is on just the G and the B string, right up at the 9th fret position of the C sharp minor blues scale. Now I'd like to get into some two-guitar approaches where there are two guitars in the studio, each one having to come up with a separate part that meshes with the other part. Al McKay and Johnny Graham of Earth, Wind & Fire in the 70s were masters at this. And usually one guy played some kind of funky chord thing and one guy played some kind of single note thing. And they usually worked perfectly together. Here's the first part. 3, 4. Now the second part is a more chordal type approach, and it has a new chord that we haven't talked about yet, which is the dominant 7 sharp 9 chord. Some people call it the Jimi Hendrix chord because of Purple Haze. And it's a very straight ahead syncopated 16th note strum. Now the thing that's important about this strum is there's a tendency to want to fill in the area, the dead area of meter between and that with more of this. And the reason for that is rhythmic instability. You're afraid you'll lose the groove. You're afraid you'll lose your inner time clock. This is one of the grooves where you don't want to fill that in because by leaving the little space, you allow some of the other instruments to pop in. So here's what it sounds like. 3, 4. Through the magic of television editing, I'm going to play both parts right now at the same time, and you'll hear the single note part down here, and you'll hear this on a split screen. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, 2, 3, 4. In the late 60s, Freddie Stone from Sly and the Family Stone became one of the principal guitarists to pioneer the incorporation of rock into the funk guitar concept. Guitar parts like the one I just played were much wilder than anything that was going on at the time on funk recordings. The first section of this tune is a simple E funk part right at the 5th fret, E pentatonic position, which I guess you're getting after 79 examples in E, the idea that E is the preferred key for funk guitarists, basically because you have these two open E strings which you can use, particularly as a drone. So the first part goes like this. All it is D to E, and that 4th, pull up on the G, and then hit our old friend the E7 sharp 9 chord. The next section that it goes into is a breakdown section, and that's where I brought in the wah-wah pedal. I'll play it straight now because it's easier to hear. See, and here's where you're taking advantage of this low E string drone. And fourth. See, and that's an A7th. So slowly it sounds like this. Here's both parts, both sections of the tune played slowly. 3, 4. This is the main event. This last groove features another two-guitar approach, but it features the kitchen sink also. Muting, extremely hard picking, octave unison bends, machine gun slide effects, and a new twist on the dominant ninth voicing. The first guitar in the intro is picking about as hard as humanly possible in this figure. Everything is with a down pick. 3, 4. Now that's the machine gun situation that I told you about. This is a trick that Wawa Watson came up with, and essentially what you do is you hit that and then hit a chord and slide, so it sounds like this. That's the first 8 bars of the guitar intro for the first guitar part. The second guitar part plays against it in a totally different way. It's using unison bends, and it's also using these machine gun parts. 4, 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. 2, 3, 4. Now let's go back to the first guitar part on the main groove that follows the intro, and you'll see that the guitar part again is playing as hard as humanly possible, but on a slightly more involved and slightly more active line. 3, 4. Against this, the second guitar plays a chordal variation of our old friend, the ninth chord. In this case, the ninth voicing looks like this. And that's going to change into a C add 9 over D, which is the same thing as a D9 sus. Here's how that rhythm sounds on the second guitar. 3, 4. Now that part, after you play the D9 to the D9 sus, you have this little muted part up at the 10th fret D blues position. The first part so you're using all these open strings, the A string and the E string, to help create the funk on this. Now let's put this all together and see what this sounds like. Well, at this point, I'm just about funked out. I hope I gave you a few good licks and concepts that you can incorporate into your playing. In a short video like this, you can only scratch the surface of a topic as infinite as funk guitar and the great players who created this style. But this is a good starting point. Make sure you go out and investigate other great players in the style like Cornell Dupree, Phil Upchurch, and Eric Gale, and you'll find a wealth of material. And above all, remember to always listen to other musicians you're playing with and play from your heart. Practice hard, dig into your soul, and maybe we'll meet up in the middle of some big fat groove someday. Take care.